As we look at NIL and the transfer portal era so far, has NIL and the portal been a gift or has it been a lump of coal? 464-5685. Here's my response to it. Here's my response. As you know, Sip and I, leading up to NIL and the portal, we're pretty opposed to it. And you might get that, understand that for Sip's perspective as being a guy in his 50s. He's used to traditional college football, whereas people my age in their 30s and 20s usually view the portal and NIL as exciting and opportunistic. And I just didn't have that vision of the portal and NIL when it came out. Now, I would tell you this. One thing that's great for the portal for this station and the state and content is there's always freaking news there. You always have portal news, whether it's a guy leaving to go in the portal, a guy coming in from the portal, looking at this person in the portal, investigating them. You're researching, could Nebraska be a good fit for them? Could that school be a good fit? So it has added even more buzz to college football. There's no doubt about that. But what would you say it has been, if the two options are in the spirit of Christmas, that the NIL and the portal have been a gift or a lump of coal? Which would you say right now if you had to say those two collectively? 464-5685. I'm going to say I go back and forth. Some days I'd say it's a gift. Some days I think it's a lump of coal. I guess it depends on if Nebraska's losing guys to other schools or not. So I'm pretty biased in this. If I look at this from a 20,000-foot view, looking down at college football and not having any sort of connection to a team, I think I would say it's been a lump of coal. Just because what you hear from the different coaches out there is that it was not meant to be tampering. The intention was never going to be tampering, but guess what? It was always going to be tampering in general in college football. I mean, you heard Jeff Traylor the other day, the head coach at Texas San Antonio, just say, what is this? Fran McCaffrey has been critical of it at Iowa for basketball. There's some people that love it and a lot that hate it. I mean, the other day, Jimbo Fisher, I thought this was the interesting quote from a guy making $100 million at Texas A&M. I got to pull this up real quick from Jimbo Fisher, the quote from the other day. But he was somewhat critical. Here is Jimbo Fisher's thoughts on the current state of college football. This, I think, was Wednesday. He says, this was, by the way, on tampering, NIL, and the transfer portal. Jimbo Fisher says, quote, "I knew eventually there would be pay for play, but I did not know it would be NIL like it came about. The problem with all of it is that there's no consistency and rules. And then when you get into the transfer portal, there is so much tampering going on. It is utterly ridiculous. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. We are only in college football." That's Jimbo Fisher, who, by the way, I'm sure was doing a bunch of pay-for-play before it was actually legal at A&M. That's a different story in itself. But that's someone making a lot of money, that's doing well in the portal, that's doing well in recruiting, that doesn't like it. But I'm sure, do we think that Jimbo Fisher is not tampering at all? Just because now everyone's allowed to get guys from the portal, you're complaining because others can do it now? There's no world that exists that Jimbo Fisher is not tampering in. No way. No way. Don't believe it. This was the Washington State head coach. I forget his name real quick, but he had some thoughts on NIL the other day. I'll get the name for you after we play it. But this is the Washington State football coach recently this week on NIL and his view.
But there is immense challenges, Colton, to what this portal and this NIL provides. Okay, there's more tampering going on than you could ever imagine. Okay, we've had guys contact our players' parents. We had a coach from another school contact one of our players and offer him NIL, a coach. Okay, so there's more things going on behind the scenes that you can't even imagine. You can't even imagine the things that are happening right now to try to pry our players away from this place. Okay, and it's stunning. It's amazing. It's the new thing that, I guess comes with this portal transformation. But it's not right. And who's going to regulate it? Who's regulating this stuff?
That is Jake Dickert, the head coach at Washington State, regarding the portal. I mean, that's kind of what Jimbo Fisher was saying there as well. I mean, that's if you go back to our conversations before this all was legalized and allowed, I mean, Sip and I had these very conversations about how do you actually get it to be, to be regulated? How do you regulate NIL? You open up the floodgates, and those aren't coming back. I mean, how do you slow this thing down and regulate it? Because at this point, you've got guys looking for already towards years ahead. Nebraska's already offered a kid from years down the road that there might be NIL up, possibilities there. There's kids in the 2025 classes that are probably already getting NIL in college or in high school, excuse me. I don't know how you can possibly slow this down and regulate it, because it was released in the wild without any sort of limitations off the get-go. And yeah, it's turned into tampering. It's turned into guys recruiting off other people's rosters and trying to get them to go to their schools. So I don't know. Do you view NIL in the portal as a lump of coal, or is it a gift? Obviously, the coach at Washington State, Jake Dickert, views it as a lump of coal. Jimbo Fisher apparently views it as a lump of coal despite using it. I'm curious again. What's the general thought there? John says this on the text line: the NIL and portal have been a gift, but not run correctly. Players should have to wait a year to transfer unless they get a new coach. There needs to be a cap on the amount of money given to players. Players should be paid, just not over $1 million like some players. Okay, let's go through that text right there. Okay, he says it's been a gift, but not run correctly. And that's where I stop and say, how do you get this ran correctly, John? How do you know that even though you want players capped at $1 million, that there won't be money below the table when they say, okay, we've reached the million, and now, by the way, to get your services, here's money not accounted for, another $800,000. You can say what you want about that, and have a limitation. Limitation does nothing. That's just what's known, the known limitation. There's going to be money out there that, like there always has been, that would not be known. So I don't think that affects anything here. He says that players should have to wait a year to transfer unless they get a new coach. So that's one part of this discussion is should everybody, no matter what the circumstances, be able to transfer right away and play right away? Or is it only in a circumstance where a head coach either is fired or leaves for a different job, that school would then have players leave freely to go somewhere else and play right away? I mean, there's certainly some merit to that conversation, to that question, that argument. But I would ask the question is what if you are at a program that you think things change? What if your position coach changes? Because if in that instance, is that really about only the head coach, or is it about all the coaches? So let's say I commit to Nebraska. Let's say I'm AJ Allen. Let's go with AJ Allen as an example. And I followed Brian Applewhite to Nebraska from TCU. Now, as of right now, AJ Allen is still on this roster, and Applewhite is not a head coach, is not a coach here anymore. But if he committed to Scott Frost also, but Brian Applewhite was the guy that got AJ Allen to Nebraska. In this situation, this scenario, if the running backs coach moves on or is fired, but let's say the head coach was retained, could he not transfer then freely somewhere else or follow that running backs coach somewhere else? I think you get into murky ground in terms of what's allowed for a 1-year transfer right away or what's not. So I have a little issue, I guess, with that, John. I appreciate the sentiment there and the idea, but I have some thoughts on that. Tim says this: I think NIL is a gift. The lump of coal is the portal. I think it's two separate critical entities. That's fair. Okay. I wanted to put them all together, but that's fair if you want to view them separately. NIL's good, portal's bad. That's fair. Randy says lump of coal only because it seriously needs more regulation and changes. Until those would possibly come, it seems to me like it is a lump of coal in this circumstance. Let's see. Matt says better embrace the portal and NIL. It's the only chance Nebraska has to get back to being a top 15 team. That's the people out there that viewed it as essential, they felt the same way. Now, Matt Rule, I would argue, is someone that develops players that are hidden gems. And maybe he could find players that don't need a bunch of NIL that Evan Cooper, his recruiting guy, have sought out. But that's a different story. Okay, Reality says, the fact that there is zero regulation is the ultimate problem, but who makes the rules and who would enforce them? That's been a clown show in college athletics since the beginning of time. You're right. Who's going to enforce the rules here? Are we getting any closer to regulation here? I mean, we hear a lot of complaining, but are we any closer than when we started NIL to having regulation? I don't think that we are. I haven't heard any news that we have regulation coming anytime soon or any inkling of hope. No idea. Let's see here from the text line. Joe in Boulder says NIL is the Wild West and will need to be modified. I am 100% in on college kids genuinely capitalizing on their name, image, and likeness opportunity. But right now, it really is a pay-for-play process. Yeah, and that's kind of been the argument. It feels like it's pay-for-play. Even if a coach is in on NIL and believes it's necessary and positive, it doesn't change the fact that it still turns into most scenarios being pay-for-play. And that was not the intention. But guess what? Even if it wasn't the intention, it was always going to become that. Who in their right mind thought that when this was proven, when this was allowed, that even if the idea was not pay for play, that it would become pay for play? Because it was pretty clear and obvious it was always going to become that. And some of you are fine with that, and that's okay. Then you love this. And I don't hate it completely. I really don't. I'm not sitting here and bashing NIL in the portal. I've seen there are certainly a lot of positives from this. No doubt about it. There are positives. I was wrong at it being completely negative. It's not completely negative. But regulation is nowhere in sight. And this is just going to, until that happens, it's going to get crazier and crazier and crazier and maybe make your mind blow. And you're going to always be having to recruit your own roster because you're going to have people tampering with your players. And I know that Nebraska fans view that as a positive thing by going to other rosters, but your roster, you lost one of your most impressive players in Ernest Hausman to Michigan. Now, was there tampering going on there? I don't know. I can't prove anything. I have no idea. But the Wolverines come in and get Ernest Hausman. Who knows if they were talking to him during the season or not?